Hi, I'm Jeffrey Parker, and welcome to the world of Jeffrey Parker Interiors. Today we've arranged a very special tour of the Schumacher showroom with Andrea Brook. We're going to look at both furniture and textiles. I think you're in for an exciting tour. Come along. We're here today in the Schumacher showroom at 979 3rd Avenue, the D&D building, with Andrea Brook, who's the sales director of Schumacher.
Hello.
Andrea and I, and a lot of people at Schumacher, go back multiple decades at this point, and in fact I first remember Schumacher when they had their standalone showroom on 3rd Avenue and East 58th Street, back in the day, as they say. Schumacher has been in this location in the D&D building for more than a decade. One of the things I admire so much about Schumacher is while they are principally known as a traditional textile manufacturer, as well as their auxiliary furniture lines and collections that they have been very nimble and agile, adjusting to market demands. Clearly, in the design industry, tastes change, tastes evolve, and from decade to decade, we can look back and see sort of very prominent features that were characteristic of any particular design moment. Schumacher's been amazing at subtly keeping up, modernizing, introducing sort of modern twist to traditional interpretations of fabrics. Andrea, tell us more about the collection today.
Well, the collection encompasses, as you rightly say, a lot of much more contemporary elements than we were ever known for, say, a decade ago. And I think some of those that I'm particularly excited by is a part global tradition that we've brought into the range, which speaks to some sort of influences from Africa and from the Middle East, and even Aboriginal feeling textiles. A lot of these cultures have very rich textile histories, and we've drawn a lot of inspiration from that. Even though some of them may be traditional to their country, to us they appear quite modern because they have geometric elements and so on. And we've also worked with some contemporary designers to produce collaborations, and I'd love to look at some of those collections with you. Well, we're very fortunate to have the driving force of Dara Caponegro at the helm. You may remember Dara was headed up Veranda for many years and has a magazine and interior design background. And I think that's also what has driven our ability to stay relevant and contemporary, is that we have Dara guiding us, and her selections and taste, if you will, informs what we have, who we are.
That's a very special relationship, to have someone who was an editor come into a textile and furniture business and be at the helm, as you say. Because as an editor, she clearly has a very trained eye to see the finished product of a design, interior, a fabric, a piece of furniture. And I think sometimes in design, one of the best things interior designers can bring to a project is the ability to edit.
Yes.
It's a fascinating balance, and that's brilliant that she's come to.
It's part of our success, and we have great vision at the top, and we've also now developed a voice around a magazine called The Bulletin, which we issue through the year, and has received wide acclaim in the design community for being, again, relevant and interesting. So why don't we go and have a look at some of the collection, Jeffrey?
That'll be terrific, really exciting.
Great. So speaking of contemporary and all things geometric and possibly a little deco, it also reminds us of the pared down Eastern tradition that also reads very modern as well. We did a collection in collaboration with a Brooklyn designer called Caroline Hurley that I think is very interesting. It has some very geometric but also hand blocky feeling to give it some softness, printing techniques, and it also looks to me very much like the I Ching. The number of bands.
Absolutely, and I love the variations on the particular squares in the blocking.
So here's another lovely modernist print, actually from the Vera Newman collection. I know that say don't follow trends, but mid-century modern, I think, is timeless.
That's more than a trend.
And it
Exactly.
isn't really a trend.
It is a period.
And we also, have to correct ourselves with terminology, because when we talk about modern, we really mean the period from about 1920 to 1970.
Correct.
And contemporary is anything that's happening now.
Today.
Exactly.
Yes.
So what's happening today isn't technically modern.
Correct.
It's actually from this period. So this speaks very much to a modern sensibility, and every time I see this with its clever lines and curves, it's not completely rectilinear. There's a softness on the edges of these, and again, the printing technique makes it feel looser and less rigid, and again, the heavy duty hand of this cloth is just a brilliant combination with that. And of course, when you think about the ways to use textiles, of course, they
The
change
draping
form.
is beautiful.
As soon as you start to make something up, it doesn't always look like a flat panel. And here are some more of our unusual and modern feeling embroideries. So embroidery itself isn't particularly modern.
No, it's a traditional technique.
Right, but
Yeah.
when we use it like this to hit some different sort of dynamics with the fabric, we've used a very geometric embroidery here, again on coloured heavy linen ground, and it speaks to something quite unusual.
Very beautiful and interesting color palette, and then of course a combination of taupe and neutrals with the accent of black. This is actually quite exciting looking. I love this.
So modern and contemporary design often asks for a little drama, and sometimes that isn't always in colour, it's in the ultimate neutral, which is black. And we've embroidered this black satin fabric, and it reminds me of maybe a lady's mantilla. I think it's extremely
Indeed.
clever. And
Even the design, the
Yes.
intricacy, it almost has a lacework quality
Yes, it
to
does.
it, and yet clearly a contemporary textile.
Yes. And here's another embroidery that mimics a sort of lace work that is dramatic and exceptional, and in all intents and purposes traditional, but the look or the feel, if you will, when it's finished, I think
It can be very
ends up being
dynamic.
quite contemporary and
Absolutely,
dramatic. Yeah.
absolutely. So tell us about the weave. Is this a machine weave?
It's
Is
a
this-
machine embroidery, which has gone on leaps and bounds in the last sort of 10 years. The technology around
Yes.
machine embroidery has allowed us to be very, very creative. So in the past, you were looking at much more simple chain stitches and larger types of stitch.
And I must say, this definitely looks like handwork.
It's-
It does not look like it came from a machine.
Tiny,
Absolutely
hand,
beautiful.
simple little stitches.
And
all
I
in
love,
combination.
the delicacy of how the pattern ends and bleeds into the taffeta here.
This is very interesting. I think this sort of reads like a bit of a work of folk art, where somebody might have hand-stitched a patchwork. It's a fabric that's been woven by the yard, but it reads like a hand-stitched patchwork. It's sort of arts and craftsy.
It is, and yet it also screams to me like a children's bedroom in a country house.
Right,
Or a
right.
children's playroom
Right.
with all of the colorful square
Yes.
blocking of it. It's an interesting thing. Andrea and I have sort of come through what is now approaching a full cycle of interior design. There was a moment, as Andrea has said, where every moment, every place in the room that you would use fabric had a pattern. There was no plain fabric. There was a
true.
patterned rug, there was patterned upholstery, there were patterned curtains, prints. It was a sort of an assault
Don't
of
forget
pattern.
the mural on the wall.
A mural on the wall. But it's interesting. It can work. It's all about balance. It's all about scale. It's all about the color combinations. And as Andrea and I were standing here looking at this fabric, I spotted a chair in the showroom and I said, my God, Andrea, this is exactly what we're talking about. The blues and greens exactly coordinate with the blues and greens of this print on linen. The small amount of whiteness is accented by the brilliance of the whiteness in this flame stitch cut velvet fabric. I believe that many people are going back to this style of decorating. I think we are going to see a revival of the 1980s. As always, these revivals, when we look back, have an impression of the current society we're living in. They are never the same, but the interpretations are very inspired by. And I think, as you see here, this is a place to go back to.
This is one of our most classic revered prints actually. It's Lotus Garden, and it's something we've been known for years.
So interestingly enough, even me in the trade for all these years, there's a modernity about the way this is drawn, about the clarity of the use of color, about the vibrancy. This feels very contemporary again. I think the world is ready to return to the excitement of beautiful textiles, of multicolored rooms, of patterning again. And I think this document is clearly going to have a great revival. It's absolutely vibrant and beautiful.
One of the prints that we have been known for over the years is Chiang Mai Dragon. It's an exuberant Chinese dragon print with overscaled carnations and peonies and dragons, and it has been used in so many ways over the years. We've recolored it, we've used it as a wallpaper, we've rescaled it. I think it's an eternal print, and for our traditional part of our house, it's one of the things that we're best known for.
And it is interesting to see how it looks in a multicolored print versus a monochromatic print in blue with slight teal cast.
So one of the textile designers from the 20th century is Joseph Frank, and he's been having a huge heyday for the last decade or so, and in our collection we have a couple of Joseph Frank prints. They have such exuberance, the colour palette and the graphics are just so cheerful and alive. This one is Citrus Garden.
And not only the graphics, but it has a certain graphic quality with the amount of background space that is allowed to breathe between the drawn images on the
Yes.
print.
Yes.
It's really quite beautiful. And there's a very playful quality to how it's drawn, not in the very traditional, serious, feeling like a peony, but this is very stylized.
Yeah.
In keeping with the Schumacher tradition of constantly evolving and growing in their design process, Schumacher here has taken the classic toile pattern, which of course is a drawn pattern, typically of people, could be 18th or 19th century images. They've taken that, which you see in this small panel, and they've blown it up exponentially to a very, very, very large proportion, which actually makes the figures human scale. In the original toile, the human being on the toile would be perhaps 6-7 inches high. This is now human scale. And if you think of artwork, contemporary artwork that's blown up, that becomes pixelated, not unlike that, you see the grain of the wood block, because toiles were printed with a wood block printing process. So you get all of this grain, which makes it very modern, very contemporary and stylized. And of course this dramatic scale, so it's a completely reinvented spin on a toile wallpaper.
We feel very, very fortunate to work with a British designer called Molly Mann, whose inspiration comes mainly from Indian hand block printing. And I think you can see that in the style, the naivety. You can almost see how those square block prints almost but don't quite line up, and I think there's a lot of charm in that. And she's usually just a two-colour pattern, and I think they are eternally usable. These, along with some of the brighter patterns of trees and corals, and these really usable little clear prints, all
Background pattern.
in that very soft hand blocky feel.
So Andrea, we would like to thank you for your time this afternoon and for this very special tour of the Schumacher showroom.
Couldn't have done it with a better person.
Thank you, dear. Love all the textiles, love the furniture, and we look forward to seeing all of you again soon. Thanks so much.